The Battle for Germany. (1944).
The Allies are ready to drop more than 2 million tons of bombs on strategic locations in Germany with day and night raids. The US B-17, with its capacity to operate at altitudes above 8,000 meters, is one of the most decisive weapons they possess. Though initial results have been discouraging with high losses of more than 30% shot down. The Luftwaffe and anti-aircraft batteries with Krupp-manufactured flak guns ferociously defend the German skies. At the start of the year, the protection afforded the bombers by US fighters leads to an increase in the effectiveness of the attacks on German industrial areas, especially those dedicated to arms manufacture. Hitler's Air Force has great difficulties defending against the numerous Allied attacks. Having lost hundreds of planes in their first line of defense, and the pilots who remain in action have orders to take off only when important objectives are threatened. Meanwhile, Stalin has mobilized the Soviet public. From the remotest parts of the country, thousands of men join the struggle against the enemy, forming an army of more than 6 million well-armed soldiers, with their minds set on victory. The Red Army General Staff has deployed them on the various battle fronts. After 3 years' struggle against Nazi power, the Soviet troops and Navy prepare for the great counteroffensive. They are ready to take advantage of the Führer's strategic error in trying to keep alive the extensive battle line from the Crimea to Leningrad, thus reducing the offensive capacity of his forces. In the north, the Red divisions on the Volkhov, Leningrad, and Baltic fronts roll back the German garrison situated in that sector, while in the south, the large ports of the Black Sea, Sebastopol and Odessa, occupied by troops under General von Manstein, are the objective of the Soviet fleet, determined to retake them at any price. On the 8th of April, the Crimean Peninsula is surrounded, and General Fedor Tolbukhin's 4th Ukrainian Front begins its liberation. Soviet planes bomb Sebastopol and Odessa, while its navy shells the German positions. On the 10th, the Soviets take Odessa and besiege Sebastopol, a vital strategic point on their march to Berlin. Retaking the city has great symbolic significance for the Soviets, while its loss is symptomatic of retreat and disaster for the Germans. The soldiers of both armies show courage in the house-to-house fighting. The Red Army push makes Hitler fear another Stalingrad, and he hastily orders the retreat of his besieged troops. They leave behind 100,000 men dead and wounded. On the 9th of May, Sebastopol falls into Soviet hands. The mounds of bodies in its streets are monuments to man's cruelty to man. By the 11th, Stalin and his high command, Stavka, have their plans ready for operations in the summer. With the northern battlefront on the borders of Estonia and Lithuania, and in the south with the Ukraine, nearly all recovered, the central zone of Belarus becomes the priority. The German Field Marshal Ernst Busch and his men surrounded in Minsk is the target of the immense Soviet force. In June, the Luftwaffe is seriously weakened, and its ability to defend against Allied operations has been drastically reduced. Hitler and his Third Reich begin to totter. From the Baltic to the Crimea, the Soviet attack on land and sea, and in the air, is unstoppable, destroying the myth of the Nazi fortress. On the 22nd, the Red Army begins Operation Bagration. The Soviet Baltic First Front attacks to the north of Vitebsk and manages to open a corridor of more than 12 kilometers through the German divisions. On the 23rd of June, the Belarus Third Front launches an offensive against the south of the city, while the second does so against the area of Orsha. Unable to stop the Soviet attack, which has destroyed the 3rd Panzer Army, Field Marshal Busch asks Hitler to be allowed to retreat. In response, the Nazi leader immediately relieves him of his command and replaces him with Field Marshal Walter Model, who is currently at the head of the army in the north of the Ukraine. By the 7th of July, the Soviets have been able to surround the German troops and enter Minsk. One week later, the Ukrainian and Belarus fronts attack together and carry out an enveloping operation in the Brody area, killing 45,000 German soldiers. On July the 20th, Hitler narrowly escapes an assassination attempt at his headquarters in Rostenburg in East Prussia. Meanwhile, the Red Army reaches the River Bug on the Polish border. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Germans collapse in the face of the tide of the millions of men that make up Stalin's armies. The Allied superiority in the air, both in the east and in the west, is so overwhelming that during the Normandy landings, Eisenhower said, "Don't worry about planes. If you see any, they'll be ours." But the OKW and the Luftwaffe have placed their hopes in the production of a new weapon, the first turbojet fighter plane, the revolutionary Messerschmitt 262. The few models that have been tested show that it is capable of inflicting a great deal of damage, and the enemy does not have means to fight against it. The Third Reich's underground factories still have the capacity to turn out 100,000 units a month. The Allies are aware of this and intensify their air attacks, increasing the power of destruction. The damage caused to German industry is so great that the manufacture of both turbojet fighters and other planes is practically halted. The air war reaches maximum intensity. The slight distinction between selective bombing and indiscriminate bombing has disappeared, and any city, whatever its size, can find itself under heavy attack. Even so, the German population managed to keep up its morale. "Our walls can crumble, but never our hearts," is the phrase that appears above the rubble and defines the resilience of a country immersed in a tragedy it does not understand. Hitler is under pressure from the Allied armies to the east and west, and to the dismay of its commanders, his invincible Wehrmacht is being smashed.
Not journeyed all this way.
For his part, Churchill and some members of the British government believe a German negotiated surrender could end the war quickly and avoid more deaths and desolation. They are also worried about the expansion of communist power, something that has preoccupied the British leader since 1917. But Roosevelt rejects this path. He had said at the Casablanca Conference in January 1943 that the end of the war would come with unconditional surrender on all fronts. This being the case, the Mediterranean is one alternative to open up another front. Five divisions are withdrawn from Italy to form the nucleus of the forces under General Alexander Patch that will invade southern France. The plan involves carrying out landings to the east of Marseille and Toulon in order to afterwards begin a new offensive to the north from the French Riviera. The Allied General Staff know all the details about the German troops in the area, as they are being watched by the French resistance, who inform the Allies about their movements. To avoid any rivalry developing between the different attacking groups, as happened in the Salerno landings, sole command is established in one U.S. ship. On the 12th of August, the ships, full of soldiers, concentrate in the Bay of Naples. Despite efforts to keep the operation secret, the German Secret Service knows about it, and General Johann Brankovic sends 30,000 men to the south coast of France. His orders are to hold off the invaders for some days until it becomes clear where the Allies have established their beachheads. Then, 200,000 men will be thrown against them. But both Brankovic and the General Staff have forgotten an important factor: Allied air power. The Luftwaffe can only count on around 100 planes to defend the Côte d'Azur, as most of their aircraft are desperately fighting in the north of the country. Eisenhower and his general staff know that they will not be able to surprise the enemy, and in order to avoid giving away too much about the areas chosen for the landings, they carry out bombardments of the same intensity at 4 different points on the coast. On the 15th of August, the convoys cross the Strait of Bonifacio en route to Toulon and Cannes, while groups of minesweepers clear the area of operations, which covers the coast from San Rafael to the coast of Cavalieri. The invasion of the south of France, Operation Dragoon, has begun. "400 planes fly over the Mediterranean, with more than 5,000 paratroopers from the 1st Division who make their jumps to occupy positions in the Lemuy area. Free French soldiers land on the left flank in the vicinity of Cavaliere, destroying the German posts on the coast and cut the road to Toulon. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the first message reaches the command ship. Landings on schedule. Opposition weak. The German troops have been taken by surprise, and their headquarters falls into the hands of enemy paratroopers. At the same time, Marines under the command of Lucien Truscott take control of Communications Center and knock out 2 German divisions. The collapse of the Reich forces sent to hold off the Allied advance continues. Thousands of German soldiers surrender, ruining the plans of Brankovic. The German general is faced by the impossibility of ordering a withdrawal, as all the bridges across the river Rodano have been destroyed. Without transmissions, there is only one chance of escape: along the road running parallel to the river, which passes through Montélimar. But the city has been taken by the Allies who, 1 week after the landings, have penetrated more than 300 kilometers into French territory. Truscott orders his troops to cut off the enemy retreat. After 8 days of heavy fighting, the German 19th Army is virtually destroyed, having lost more than 11,000 men and 2,500 vehicles. On the 23rd of August, the Maquis take control of the important city of Marseille. Its population welcomes the liberation with tears of joy, but also of sadness for all those who did not make it. After 4 years in exile, Charles de Gaulle returns to France. The inhabitants of Normandy welcome him with open arms, answering the doubts that the U.S. commanders have about him. The French general has repeated hundreds of times over the radio the same message: that if the Nazis do not want to die at the hands of the French, then they must return home. In their rapid advance following the Normandy landings, the Allies find themselves a few miles from Paris, and the Germans begin the evacuation of the city. After a week of street fighting, on the 25th of August, Marshal Philippe Leclerc and his armored vehicles make their triumphal entry through the Porte d'Orléans. Accompanied by thousands of soldiers, including numerous Spanish Republicans, they make their way to the headquarters of the German governor, Dietrich von Choltitz. Choltitz disobeyed Hitler's orders by refusing to destroy the city's most emblematic buildings before Allies arrived. And although there are still pockets of resistance, he signs the surrender of the capital. Ignoring the risk of German snipers still hiding on roofs, General de Gaulle walks along the Champs-Élysées in the heart of Paris. Life means little in comparison with the dignity of the country, he said. In front of thousands of people, he shouts, "Paris is free. France and its destiny will be free." From the steps of the Hôtel de Ville, Charles de Gaulle proclaims himself President of France. The City of Light shines more than ever. Meanwhile, the Germans retreat to the German frontier. On the 11th of September, General Patton's men regroup in Châtillon and prepare to undertake the march on Berlin. On their route to the heart of the Third Reich, one of the most difficult places to cross is in the Netherlands, where the Germans have concentrated more than 400,000 men. Most of these are in the area of Arnhem, which is defended by the 9th and 10th Panzer Divisions, together with numerous anti-aircraft batteries. There are also a number of Luftwaffe bases, which make Allied air operations in the area difficult. In mid-July, Eisenhower asked his commanders to prepare a plan to intervene in this area. Of the 16 presented, that of Field Marshal Montgomery was the one chosen. Operation Market Garden aims at the conquest of Holland through a massive airborne operation. It is made up of two phases. Market, the airborne phase, has the objective of taking the bridges along the 100 kilometers that separate Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem on the banks of the rivers Maas and Rhine. The Garden phase includes the land operations that will be carried out at the same time by the British 30th Armored Corps, who are to cover the distance between the three cities in only 2 days to link up with the paratroopers. Once Arnhem is occupied, Montgomery intends to advance eastwards and penetrate the German industrial zone of the Ruhr, with the intention of destroying the heart of the Reich and becoming the first to reach Berlin. September 16th. Lancaster and B-17 bombers, escorted by Spitfires and P-51 Mustangs, attack the routes and artillery emplacements near the area where the paratroopers will carry out their operations. September 17th. In the early hours, the Allied planes continued their incursions over the German anti-aircraft defenses, from Walcheren Island to Arnhem. The sky is clear, and the forecast is for good weather to continue. At 8 o'clock, the British planes and gliders take off from 24 aerodromes in the south and Midlands of England, en route to the objective. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the paratroopers begin their jumps into the areas of Eindhoven and Arnhem. In charge of the enormous airborne force is General Brereton. British, Americans, and Polish make up the force of 350,000 men with different missions to accomplish. The U.S. 101st is to occupy Eindhoven and the connections between Zoon, Oedenrode, and Veghel, and the Waal Rhine in Nijmegen, and the British 1st to control the bridges over the River Neder. In order to facilitate the movement of the troops in Operation Garden, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the 30th Corps, under the command of Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, opened fire from the Belgian frontier on the German positions along the Eindhoven Road. Encountering less anti-aircraft opposition than expected, the first part of the operation is successful. The British paratroopers make their jumps 15 kilometers to the west of Arnhem, very close to the German concentrations of heavy artillery around the city, and begin the advance towards the bridge over the Rhine. Other units in this first wave remain close to the places where they land, waiting for the arrival of those following them. The surprised German troops, commanded by General Student, reinforce their positions under orders to hold the bridges at all costs. Informed of the situation, Hitler orders 300 fighters to urgently be sent to the area, something that is impossible as they do not have them. The British have managed to take control of the southern end of the bridge at Arnhem. However, as night falls and the Germans are able to increase their number of troops, it becomes apparent that taking the northern end will be more difficult. September 18th. In the Nijmegen area, the Americans have achieved their preliminary objectives, capturing the city of Graz and crossing the river Maas. But upon approaching Eindhoven, their advance is halted by stiff German resistance to the south of the city. Meanwhile, the British units that have crossed the Dutch frontier head northwards, firing Tiffin missiles. The situation in Arnhem is becoming more complicated, and the streets are turned into a battlefield where the fighting is house to house. The combat intensifies, and new troops and panzers enter the area in force. Keeping control of the bridge is an absolute priority for the Germans. The British, cut off and outnumbered, demonstrate great courage in the face of adversity, holding their positions on the end of the bridge as they wait reinforcements. At dusk, the next wave of paratroopers make their jumps. The Germans, alerted, kill hundreds of them before they even touch the ground, turning the action into a complete failure. The British surrounded in the west of Arnhem are becoming dejected. Their ammunition is running out, and unless they receive help urgently, they will be swept off the bridge by the German tanks. Their only hope is to resist until the arrival of the British Second Army, situated to the south. September 19th. The Germans continue to receive troops and armored vehicles. The Luftwaffe, in the absence of Allied aircraft, is in command of the skies. Meanwhile, at Arnhem Bridge, the British paratroopers are hard pushed to hold off the German pressure, and in Nijmegen, the Americans suffer significant losses. Close to Eindhoven, the battle is a bloodbath. September 20th. From Oosterbeek in the north to Soon in the south, heavy fighting is causing thousands of casualties on both sides. The cities have been turned into rubble, and at the end of the day, there is a truce to recover the wounded. The violence of the combat results in a hellish scene of charred bodies, in burnt-out tanks, and corpses scattered everywhere. Field Marshal Walter Model reorganizes his command and leaves the troops fighting in the west in the hands of General Gustav von Zangen. Those in the east are under General Kurt Student, and those at Arnhem, together with the panzers, in the command of General British. September 21st. The German armored vehicles unleash a powerful counteroffensive at Arnhem, and the British are forced to give up their bridgehead and retreat. In the afternoon, General Eucourt manages to send an urgent message to Allied headquarters, informing them that there are few survivors from the division in a small area. Casualties are high. It is vital they receive help in the next 24 hours. At the end of the day, the Polish paratrooper brigade arrives in the vicinity of Arnhem under General Sosabowski. September 22nd. The British soldiers at Arnhem are going through hell. The ring around Lieutenant Colonel Frost's men tightens, while reinforcements try unsuccessfully to reach them. Horrocks' divisions that, according to Montgomery, were to take 48 hours to arrive, still have not appeared after a week of ferocious fighting. September 23rd. Model orders British to raise Arnhem. The surviving British continue to offer stiff resistance in the hope of being evacuated. Meanwhile, in Veghel, the Allies keep the way to Nijmegen closed to halt the German counterattacks with heavy losses. September 24th. The differences of opinion between von Rundstedt, the commander-in-chief of the Western armies, and Hitler become increasingly apparent. While the former proposes a withdrawal to the River Meuse, the Führer decides to send more troops to the front, accompanied by the fearsome König Tiger tanks. September 25th. The British and Americans launch Operation Berlin to evacuate the surviving forces at Arnhem. During the night of the 25th to the 26th, 2,000 soldiers managed to escape. For the remainder, the ruined city will be their grave or their prison. Of the 35,000 paratroopers that landed to the north of the Rhine, the Allies lose 17,200, dead, wounded, or disappeared. The Germans have lost 13,500 men. The only thing that has been achieved is the occupation of an area close to Nijmegen, with no strategic importance. Speaking of the men at Arnhem, Churchill said, "They performed a feat of arms which will be remembered and recounted as long as the virtues of courage and resolution have power to move the hearts of men." For his part, Montgomery would write, "In my prejudiced view, if the operation had been properly backed from its inception and given the aircraft, ground forces, and administrative resources necessary for the job, it would have succeeded in spite of my mistakes or the adverse weather, or the presence of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps in the Arnhem area. I remain Market Garden's unrepentant advocate." To counterbalance the defeat at Arnhem, the Allies make rapid progress in their advance through Normandy, following the landings, and achieve the stabilization of the Western Front. The Allied General Staff has decided that the final assault on the Third Reich will be made on two fronts. From the north by an army of American and British troops, led by Field Marshal Montgomery, which will move east, crossing the Low Countries and the Rhine on the way to Berlin. In support, two U.S. armies under the command of Generals Most and Patton will take on all the German forces situated to the west of the river.